Hello, everyone, and I just want to welcome you to one of our very special talks today. That's going to be under the theme Iterating Education Powering the Next Generation for a World Unknown. There are speakers who walk you through well lit paths, and then there are those who hand you a flashlight, point toward the fog, and say, let's go figure it out together. Our guest today is firmly in the second category. He's not just a thought leader, he's a thought disruptor, which is very important. He's a first generation American who helped launch Google for education into classrooms around the world. He's also a strategist, a provocateur, if you want to say, and a man who once said that putting artificial intelligence in our current school system is like strapping a turbo engine onto a horse, let me say a horseback side. It's not just a funny line, it's a warning that we can't just tweak education for the future. We need to reimagine it. Rethink what it means to prepare the next generation, not for a known destination, but for a world that does not exist yet. And that's exactly what we're here to do through this talk. So fasten your seat belts or saddle up, depending on your preferred metaphor, of course. And please join me in welcoming the one and only Jaime Casap. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. It's a pleasure to be here. Excited to be here. Excited to finally do this. I know we've been trying to do something like this for a while. I know I did a video message a couple years ago, so it's exciting to be here live. So first, let me start by saying welcome. And I know this is a virtual thing. I know it's online, and either you're watching this live or you're watching a recording of this. That does not mean that the conversation needs to stop here or that it's a one-way communication. So please feel free to ask questions. I do my best when answering questions. Those are always the most fun I ever have. As a matter of fact, whenever I do keynotes at events anywhere in the world, I always try to make sure that we do a follow-up Q&A session, because just hearing the keynote is just the beginning, right? Just getting the thought in people's heads, or getting thoughts in people's heads is part of the solution. The next part of the solution is how do we convert those thoughts into questions, and then how do we convert those questions into actions, right? And that's really what I like to focus on. So either ask questions here if you're here live. If you're watching this recording and there's a place for you to ask a question, please do that. If that doesn't work, I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on all the social media channels. I try to respond to as many comments and concerns and questions that people have. So please reach out. All right, with that, I want to welcome you to Flagstaff, Arizona. This is my what I like to call my winter hideout. I live in Phoenix, Arizona, and it's hot in Phoenix during the summer, so I escape up to the mountains up here in Flagstaff, where it's a lot cooler. So up in the mountains, and the air is thinner. It's more livelier and easier to be outside. So welcome to my place in Flagstaff, my studio away from my studio in Flagstaff, Arizona. What I want to talk about this morning is a reflection on what you just mentioned in introduction. I wrote an article called, are we strapping a turbo engine on a horse's butt when we talk about AI in education? Because this is a topic that I've been talking about for a long time, which is this idea of how do we revolutionize education? How do we take education to the next level? And oftentimes it's this argument in abstract, but I think we're living in a time where that argument has to be in reality, that the reality of the situation that we're in is that education needs to change, not so much because it's broken, as I talked about in my article, but more because the times that we face are different. And this is something I've been warning about for 20 years, but it's true now. I actually just read an article this morning in the Wall Street Journal about how recent college graduates are finding a hard time getting a job. And we're not talking about, kids that graduate from community colleges. We're talking about Harvard MBAs having a hard time finding work. And technology is the reason why. So I want to focus on that. So let me go through a couple of slides here, just as a context for you, to something to look at. I like to think, again, thank you for the introduction, just a little bit more. I like to think of myself as someone who's been in the education space for my entire life, but really the last 30 years focused on how do we really revolutionize organizations to take advantage of the technology that we have, and then how do we use that in education. It all started for me at Arizona State University back in 2005, where we were really focused on trying to fix a problem that Arizona State University was having with email. And that's where we introduced the idea of Google Apps for Education. So we launched Google Apps for Education at Arizona State University back in 2006. And I've been in this space working specifically in technology and education for that long. Before that, I spent 7 years at Accenture working in electronics and high tech, working on change management issues, working on organizational design and culture. And before that, I worked for Governor Cuomo for a few years. The first Governor Cuomo, not the one running for mayor in New York, focused on welfare reform. And it all comes down to the most basic thing, which is starting education, starting our disruptions at the culture level. And that's what I want to focus on today. Just to highlight that, we've been talking about education here for a couple of minutes and the importance of education, but I think it's important to kind of, create a foundation of why education is important. And the simple answer for me and where my passion comes from is that education disrupts poverty. It doesn't matter where you are in the world, it disrupts poverty. And that was true for me. I'm a first generation American, born and raised in Hell's Kitchen, New York in the 70s and 80s. I grew up with a single mother on welfare and food stamps. And the reason I get to talk to you today, the reason I was able to accomplish what I've been able to accomplish is because of education, right? Education was my silver bullet. And so it's important for me to lock into that idea that education is what disrupts poverty. But here's the thing that we don't think about, because we often think about that, right? Like, you got a good education, you can do anything. But the impact that we have and why this is such an important topic is that the impact that we have goes on for generations and generations and generations. That the impact isn't just for the students that we face today, but that impact goes on forever. And I know this because I now have my own kids, and I have 3 of them. I have a 33-year-old, a 24-year-old, and a soon-to-be 11-year-old. I know they're very separate. I like one at a time, just the way I like it, one at a time. But my 33-year-old has a college degree, lives in New York City, runs her own video production company, doing amazing, just a badass human. My 24-year-old actually just texted me this morning. He's applying for a second job. He has currently a job. He's also living in New York City. Apparently, I took my kids to New York City, where I'm from, too many times, and they fell in love because they both live there. So my 24-year-old is also in New York, and he's creating his path. He has a college degree. And my 11-year-old, I don't know if she's going to have a college degree, but I know she's going to be educated in whatever sense that means. But that's the impact that we have, that the impact on me for my 3rd grade teacher, my 6th grade teacher, my high school teachers, and my college professors, that impact goes on into my kids and into their kids. That's why this is so important to focus on. This is why we have to focus on education. And so for me, and what I mentioned in that article, is that isn't so much that education is broken or it doesn't work, because the reality is that education is doing exactly what it was designed to do. Education, at least here in the US and in many parts of the industrial world, it was made to create education at mass, right? To scale education, because real education is one-to-one, right? Real education is me being an apprenticeship to someone for 20 years and then taking over the business. That was the old model. Then we scaled that into the system where we did a one-to-many. So one teacher to many students. And that worked because what we needed about 80-90% of the population to have basic literacy, basic education, so that they can function in the Industrial Revolution. And then we needed about 20% of that population to have more education so that they can manage those people. That's the model that we had for a long time. And education is still set up that way. And again, it's doing really well. Here in the US, graduation rates are the highest they've ever been. Graduation rates for Black or Latino students are the highest they've ever been. Test scores are higher now. COVID kind of threw things off, but they were trending higher. So education is doing exactly what it's supposed to be doing. So it's not that education is broken, is that the fundamental system has changed and education needs to change to it, because we now live where digitalization is in everything that we do, right? Oops, sorry, I hit the wrong button. So when we think about change, any kind of change, I like to say that change happens slowly and then suddenly. And what we're living now is in suddenly times. And the best illustration is this. One of the illustrations, we can use many different types of illustrations to show this, but one of them is here when we talk about the idea of city planning. As you can see here in this image, city planning was done like this for a very long time, right? It was done by hand on paper. And for years and years and years, we didn't have the release of AutoCAD until 1982. And so you can see here between like the 50s and the 70s, nothing really changed. So for 20 years, we were basically doing the same, except, we invented color photography so we could take better pictures. And, what that looked like even before that was like this. This is, here in the United States and in many industrial countries, our city planning were done on these giant pieces of paper with pencils and rulers and people in suits on the floor drawing things out. And this is how it was done for a very long time. And now we're starting to see the change happen more suddenly. So again, from the 20s to the 30s to the 40s to the 50s to the 60s to the 70s up to the 80s, it was done the same way. And then in the 80s, when we saw the AutoCAD being introduced, you started seeing technology take more hold of things like city planning. But even since the 1980s, it happened slowly. Now we're starting to see this rapid change where in the last 10 years, you're starting to see more VR type of development when it comes to city planning. And now with the introduction of AI, which feels like it's been 10 years, but reality has only been like 2 years, you're starting to see AI being introduced into the idea of city planning. So change happens suddenly and then rapidly. And what we're stuck in now is this stage of suddenly rapid change. And this is the environment that this next generation of students, the alpha generation, my 11-year-old, right? That's what she is facing. She's facing a world of constant, consistent, rapid change. And when you can see this with lots of different things. So for example, when you think about computing today, you don't really understand, or not you, but a lot of people don't really understand that the technology that we have, your fastest MacBook, your fastest data center is nothing compared to what's coming, right? So for example, this is what rapid technology is going to look like. When we are able to master quantum computing, right, which we're getting closer and closer to do, you're going to see some significant change in the way things are processed. A great illustration is this next slide here, where if anyone knows what this number is, this number is 10 septillion. What does that mean? Why do I have this number up here? Well, Google performed a recent a recent achievement on its quantum computing system, where Willow, their big quantum computer, performed a benchmark computation in under 5 minutes. So it took this crazy equation that supercomputers work on, and this quantum computer in simulations was able to complete the equation in 5 minutes. Well, a supercomputer, the world's most powerful supercomputer, would take 10 septillion years to complete that same equation. And just to understand what 10 septillion means, right? So I had to write this down because I don't even understand it, right? So we between a billion. So let's just say I said it took the Google supercomputer, the Google quantum computer 5 minutes, and it would take the world's most powerful supercomputer a billion years. That would be enough. But septillion means a trillion is 1,000 billion, a quadrillion is 1,000 trillions, a quintillion is 1,000 quadrillions, a sextillion is 1,000 quintillions, and a septillion is 1,000 sextillions. So we're talking about forever. It would take forever. It just wouldn't be possible. That's quantum computing. And that's what's coming, and it's literally around the corner. It's going to fundamentally change how we do computing for everything. Everything from any password that you can ever imagine. And I'm not talking about your personal password on your phone. I'm talking about passwords to like the American Express data center, right, where gazillions of dollars are being held, will instantaneously be able to be broken, right? So we're talking super, super, super computing power that's coming. So when we think about what's coming in the future and what we're going to be able to do in the future, that's what's around the corner. Or we're talking about something like computing chips in the human brain, and we're starting to see. And when I first started talking about this, it was still a theory, and now we have companies that are actually doing this, putting powerful AI computing chips into the mind, and what that's going to possibly do, right? Or we're talking about biotechnology and nanotechnology, things that were part of movies, where we're able to go into taking microscopic ships, really, with powerful computing chips, and being able to put them into the human body and go in and repair things at the cell level, right? Or at the atom level. Those are the types of things that are coming. And when we think about putting those things together, how we're going to power that, and fusion technology is going to be here faster than you think. One of the most amazing human breakthroughs is what we were able to do in the lab in California, where we're able to finally produce positive energy from fusion, right? So, the best example is 2 atoms go in and 3 come out. We're able to produce that. And that was, 2 years ago. And 2 years ago, we were predicting that fusion was going to come at us in 100 years. And now we're talking about 20 years. And what we're going to be able to do with fusion technology and fusion power, having clean, limitless power, is going to be what powers these nanocomputing and these quantum computers and everything else that's coming. And you're starting to see this already take shape and everything, right? Where everything is based on AI. There isn't a company that doesn't have AI in it. There isn't a product that doesn't have some kind of AI element to it. And so it's in everything that we do. I actually just read an article, and I'm trying to write this article, and I'm trying to write a response to some articles that I read about how universities are going back to blue books and getting people to handwrite answers, as if that's the solution to solving this problem that we're having with, quote, cheating in education. And so Gemini, whether it's Gemini, ChatGPT, anything that Anthropic puts together, any of these large learning model systems are integrated into everything that we do. I have in my to read pile an article about how, from Gallup, a survey about AI at work and how AI is being utilized at work. And a year ago, that number was like 20%, and it's almost doubled since then. And so in the next year, almost everyone at work will be using some elements of learning management system, of these large scale AI models in the work that they do. Using all this technology, seeing all this in real life, makes it real, right? A lot of the times when I was talking about these things 20 years ago, they were theories or they were predictions, they were futuristic, but seeing them in real time is really where it has an impact. And I don't know if you ever had a chance to be in a self-driving car. Waymo, which is a Google company, or technically a company started at Google, it's a separate company, is a real company. It's a self-driving car company. We have them in Phoenix, Arizona. They are cars that you call, they show up. And this is my daughter in one of those Waymo cars in the back seat. And, when you look at who's driving it, no one is driving it. So here's a car that is driving through the middle of the 5th largest city in the US with no one in the driver's seat. And as many times as I've been in a Waymo, and as many times as I've been in self-driving cars while I was at Google, I was in one of the first ones back in 2010 when I had giant cameras strapped to it. When you experience this, it never gets old. This idea that this car is driving itself. My daughter will actually say she prefers the Waymo car to me driving, for obvious reasons. But this is her experience in cars. What will this look like in 20 years? Here in the US, and it's probably a higher percentage in the rest of the world. Here in the US, something like 4 million people make a living driving things, driving supplies, driving equipment, driving people. And you can be in a self-driving car today, right? Like the Waymo. The trucking industry is starting to implement self-driving cars. There'll be self-driving trains. There'll be self-driving planes. Like all the people who work in transportation, what happens to those people in the work that they do if you have these self-driving cars? And yeah, for a number of years, there'll still be truck drivers in the trucks, even if the trucks are driving themselves. But it'll be pretty quick. It'll be quick before we realize that we don't need the people in the cars and the trucks are better just driving by themselves. What's that going to look like in the next 5 years, 10 years, 20 years? Green technology is starting to be impacted. It's starting to show an impact in lots of designs. Here in Phoenix or in Arizona, most designs have to have a sustainability plan associated with it. So you're seeing these buildings go up that literally look like giant shrubs because they're all covered in green, because we need green technology. We're starting to see the idea of cobots replace in a process work. So this idea that you're going to work, even if you're a manual labor, even if you're doing manual labor, there's a really good chance that in the next 10 years, your coworkers will be what we call cobots, right? These robots that work alongside you. And right now they're just electronical arms, but it's pretty soon before they're self-walking machines that work with you and have personalities, and you'll start seeing this. And we often think, well, that's great for process work. That's great for work that is repetitive, but it will never replace human creativity. And that's just not true. The argument that humans have empathy and robots do not isn't true. I'm starting to see data where it's better to have AI respond to customer complaints than actual human beings, because human beings, believe it or not, it's hard to sit on the phone for 8-10 hours a day and listen to people complain. As well trained as you are, there's just the human nature of like enough is enough, where robots and AI don't experience that. So a robot, an AI agent that can take on a person's persona can have at least an image of empathy for someone complaining, because they can listen to it all day. They have no emotions or feelings. And so empathy as a human emotion, for example, is something that robots might be able to do better than humans. And in terms of whether robots can be as creative as humans, well, we're starting to see them not just have an impact on work, but in creation as well. And when we get to real, generative AI, where robots and AI are creating original thought, we're going to start seeing actual original thought and creations from robots. In 2025, the Beatles won a Grammy, but it was AI that won the Grammy. AI was involved in that. So the combination of all these things, or it's cobots and green technologies and nanotechnologies, all this, I would have said 5 years ago, this stuff's coming, but you can make the argument that's already here. And one of the most fascinating things that happened to me, when I look at the world and I watch news and I see what's happening, when Demis said on 60 Minutes, and this is, I worked at Google for 15 years. I was the chief education evangelist there. I've had articles in the New York Times and a Wall Street Journal. I did interviews with lots of publications. So I was PR approved. Like I could do PR stuff for Google. And I can tell you that out of all the things I did at work, that was the most nerve-wracking, was saying something publicly, because it had to be absolutely approved by Google when you said it, right? And so when Demis got on, even though, he's a Nobel Prize winner for him and his team for, mapping a protein, when he got on 60 Minutes a couple weeks ago and he said that we will be able to cure disease in the next 10 years, I was blown away, because that wasn't some crazy prediction by some crazy guy. This was a prediction from the CEO of DeepMind, the heart and soul of Google AI, who won a Nobel Prize for mapping a protein, who is telling us that in 10 years, we will have the cure to all diseases. That's just an insane thing to hear, but that's the future that this generation faces. So the promise of AI. So what does this mean for work? Right? At the end of the day, this is great. Abstract, all these wonderful things, cure diseases, self-driving cars, spaceships. Look, I'm still waiting for my my jetpack that I was promised when I was a kid in the 70s. All these things are wonderful and abstract, but in reality, what does that mean for work? Well, what it means for work is that if you're doing process work, if you're doing repetitive work, work that can easily be repeated by either a machine or technology, we're going to see a change in what technology does to those jobs. And we're going to see a change in what those jobs are. So here in this image, you can see a photo of a supermarket. And I remember, my first job, and this is relevant to me because my first job was working in a supermarket. I started by bagging groceries, and then eventually I was a cashier at my stepfather's grocery store on 53rd Street and 9th Avenue. And I remember these jobs well, and these are very high-end jobs. It used to be that being a cashier or being someone who worked in a grocery store, these were jobs that had benefits. Here in Arizona, we have a chain called Bashas', and cashiers were making $25 an hour, 30 years ago. These are jobs that were the front end to the store. They were there to make sure that they took money and gave the right change. They were there to make sure checks weren't fraud. They were there to help customers. They used to know the prices of things. They used to know where everything was in different aisles. They were very important roles inside the supermarket experience. That job, right, has become so easy that you can do it. And I have all the confidence in the world that you can do this job because this is the job that my kid does. We go to a store and, we don't go through the cashier's line anymore. We just do self-checkout. And so this is a picture, and I keep this picture because she's 5 years old in this picture. So this picture's 5 years old. 5 years old, and she is literally doing the job of a professional cashier, right? She's scanning things and putting them in the bag, and I can just hand her my card and she can pay for it at 5 years old. That's how easy this job has become. That job is expanded into other things. During COVID, we saw a new industry born, which was the delivery, where someone would go shopping for you and pack things for you and then bring them to you. That became a job that cashiers started doing. Great, that's a job. How long did that job last? Well, you can today, many supermarkets and grocery stores are using these self-driving carts where they just load everything in a cart and the cart delivers it to your house, right? So these jobs in real time, you can see them disappearing. Does this mean that all grocery jobs are going away? Not necessarily. It just means that jobs are shifting to more complex, more human skill perspective jobs. For example, if you look at this image here of the produce section of the grocery store, if you think about all the things you see here, all these vegetables, they're mostly vegetables, right? Yeah, these are all vegetables. I don't know what any of these things are. I'm not a big vegetable guy, right? But if you look at these vegetables, I think about the billions of combinations that you can do to put these vegetables together to make them good. Can a machine do that? Sure, but not yet. So imagine walking into a grocery store and instead of having to have cashiers, because you don't need cashiers anymore because you have self-checkout lines and you don't need stock boys or stock people to stock up your shelves anymore because you'll have robots doing that. But does that mean you're not going to have anyone working in your grocery store? No, it means that you're going to hire different people. So imagine walking into a grocery store and you're greeted by someone that says, hey, what's your nutritional strategy today? What's your diet plan this week? What are your meal preparation plans this week? Oh, you don't know how to make those three things? Come over to my demo station. I'll show you what ingredients you need and I'll help you make them. So now you're hiring dietitians, licensed cooks. You're hiring chefs that can help you master the skill of shopping and preparing food, right? So it doesn't mean that the 10 jobs in the grocery store are going away just because the grocery store jobs are going away. It means that those 10 jobs are going to actually be 4 jobs or 5 jobs, but they're going to be higher paying jobs because you're going to need more skill to do that job. And that's what we're seeing across the board. So when we think about what are the skills that we need for this future, I think of it in terms of human skills. I think about like what do robots do really well and what do humans do really well, and how do we combine those two things? So it's not how do we battle the robots. This isn't Terminator. This isn't how we're going to go to war with robots. This is all about how do we collaborate with robots? How do we collaborate with AI? How do we collaborate with machines? And what I look at is what are those human skills? And so I put together this matrix that I built last summer, this is just a high level view of a very detailed matrix that I created that I'm going to use for lots of different things that I can get to in a minute. But these are the most important human skills. The first one across the top is agency and self-management skills, right? The ability to manage yourself. And then across the bottom there, you'll see what I call the ability to thinking skills, the ability to learn and adapt is going to be an important human skill. What I call the ability to get shit done, right? The ability to get things done. Here's something, get done, now go finish it. The fourth one is what I call storytelling or communication skills. But that's not just really about sitting at a campfire telling a story. It's about how you take complex information and present it to your audience. How do you take these crazy ideas and present it to an audience that is concise and makes sense to them? And the last one in that column there is what I call community skills and the ability to engage in community, whether that community is your team, whether that community is your organization or your department, whether that community is your organization, your city, your state, your country, whatever that is. What is your community engagement skills? Like, how do you have those? And then across the bottom is what I call technology and digitalization skills. And I want to highlight, how much time do we have? We have some time. So I want to highlight a couple of these and get into a couple more details. So for example, here's some definitions, and you can see these if you want to pause them, but these are definitions that I came up with for what these core skills are, right? The thinking skills, the ability to analyze information and solve problems, the ability to make informed decisions, whether you're talking about ability to get things done, practical abilities to execute tasks effectively, right? So if I give you a task and I think it's going to take you 2 days and it takes you 10 days, you're probably not very good at this. So how are you making sure that you can organize and prioritize and be accountable to the tasks that you're facing? Or storytelling skills, the ability to craft and deliver compelling narratives that communicate ideas and influence audiences, like I'm trying to do here with you today. How do you build those skills? How do you make sure you have master those skills? And then across the top there, the agency and self-management skills, the ability to take ownership of one's development and build expertise, right? You're responsible for your learning. You're responsible for your competence, right? So how do you make sure that you have the skills to continuously develop those self-management skills? And then across the bottom is the technology and digitalization skills, right? The ability to take advantage of these tools. Especially now when you think about AI, I read 3 or 4 newsletters a day on AI, and it's overwhelming how fast things move. It's if you just follow one, if I follow Google's Gemini stuff, and every day is a new story of something. I don't even know how they're doing it, but every day is a story of something new that they're able to produce and make. How do we make sure our students understand those things, right? So let me give you a couple of examples of what these look like across the board, right? So I ranted about this on one of the posts on LinkedIn, this idea that taking tests has nothing to do with thinking, right? I often did very poorly on, general assessments, because if I look at a multiple choice test, and you gave me 5 choices, and if you gave me enough time, I could probably make all 5 choices correct, right? That's just the craziness that's in my head. Testing is not the same as thinking. And so we have to make sure that we understand what real thinking is, and it's definitely not the way we assess it today. Whether the ability to learn, right? This idea that how do you learn something, right? The ability to say, I don't know how to do something. That's where it starts, but I know how to learn how to do it, right? I often joke about, going back to the vegetables that you saw in that other slide. I often say, you would never hear me say I'm a bad cook. I don't say I'm a bad cook. I say I've chosen not to be a good cook, because I understand that the ability to be a good cook is in me, and the information and resources that are out there to be a good cook are out there. And if I put those 2 things together, I could be a good cook. And this is why I don't have a lot of friends, because I'll have people say to me, you're very creative, or I'm not good. Educators will say, I'm not good with computers. I'm just not good with technology. And my response to them is, no, you've chosen not to be creative, and you've chosen not to be good with computers, because everything that you need to be good is out there for you. And so this idea of the ability to learn starts with, I don't know how to do something. Let me go figure out how to do it. And then let me learn whether or not I'm doing it and whether or not I know how to do it. And let me assess whether I learned how to do it. That's an important skill for the future, because nothing is going to be more important for the future than the ability to learn and adapt to the environments that we're in. I often say that, we focus on trying to ask our kids what they want to be when they grow up. And if I used to say that, I've been saying that for 20 years, and it's more true than ever. This idea that what you want to be when you grow up doesn't exist. And even if you know what you want to be, what is your scope of influence? When you might be able to see 4 or 5 jobs, but there's thousands of jobs that you might not have any idea about. So instead of asking kids what they want to be when they grow up, I want to ask them what problem they want to solve, right? What's the problem that they're passionate about, or what's the opportunity that they're passionate about? It doesn't have to be a social problem. It doesn't have to be solving world hunger or political turmoil. It could be, how to make a camera more light efficient, right? There's lots of problems, right? There's a show here in the US, and I think it's an international thing as well, which is called, Shark Tank. And everyone who walks into the Shark Tank is solving a problem. So what's that problem that you want to solve? And the second question then becomes, well, how do you want to solve it? And that question is almost as important as the first question. And the third question is, well, what do you need to learn to solve that problem? And I want to give you a quick illustration of what I mean, because it's important to put this in context, right? So if you ask a student, what problem do you want to solve? And a student says, I want to solve climate change. Well, if they say, I want to solve climate change, you might say, oh, climate change, you need to go get a degree in environmental studies, or you need to go get a master's in global sustainable development. But what if they're not good in labs? What if they're not meant to live in classrooms for the next 6 years, right? What if they aren't good at the science part of the environmental crisis, but they still care and are passionate about the environment, right? And that's why the second question is important. How do you want to solve it? Because if you think about climate change, or you think about education, or you think about anything, there's a billion ways to get involved in solving a problem. So let's say they're not good at labs. They're not good at sitting in school. They have severe ADHD like me. The way they can solve, but they do an assessment. This is the stuff that I'm currently working on, and the work that I'm doing around career ladders. But let's say they do an assessment, and what comes out of this assessment is that they are a gifted photographer, right? Or they're just a brilliant writer. They're just a naturally gifted, brilliant writer. Well, the way they can solve climate change is by going out and documenting climate change or writing about climate change. What if they're a gifted educator? The way they can solve climate change is by creating an educational program for climate change, or an experiential program around climate change. There's so many different ways to solve climate change that we don't have to really resort right to our core understanding and say, oh, climate change, you need to go be a scientist and get a degree in environmental studies. And then the third question is just as important, which is, what do you need to learn to solve that problem? What are the knowledge, skills, and abilities that you need to have? And now all of a sudden you can create a really comprehensive, personalized education plan for that student, right? They want to solve climate change. They're a great writer, and we did an assessment. They're writing at 10th grade level, let's say. But to really have an impact on climate change, they should probably be writing at a 14th grade level. Okay, cool. Now what do you need to learn? We can create a really detailed and personalized learning plan for that student that helps them improve their writing, helps them gain knowledge about the environmental issues. They might need to take classes in environmental studies. And they can create a detailed, personalized plan that says, if I do these things, I will be prepared to go write about climate change and have an impact in climate change. So that's why we want to be able to ask our students different questions, because we live in different times. And then this idea that storytelling is how things get done, to me, is fundamental to what we do here. There's so much information that's coming at us. There's so much that we've accomplished as humans just through storytelling. The idea of writing things down is relatively new when you lay it across the transformative nature of humanity. It's not that old. And so how do we tell stories, whether those are written stories, oral stories, whether they're in groups, whether it's for small audiences, large audiences? Being able to tell stories is fundamental to getting things done, building emotion, right? My daughter's a filmmaker, and I remember this was her capstone class. She won, I'm bragging a little bit, but she won her capstone project. She won first place in her capstone when she was in film school. And the chair of the department of film standing next to me while we were watching all the student films. And he says to me, your daughter has something that we can't, we taught her some stuff, but she's got something that we can't teach, that she's able to master over the last 4 years. And it's the ability to build emotion into stories. And he's like, she can tell a story about a robot and make you cry. Right. And so that idea of storytelling becomes absolutely critical in how we develop skills. And then this idea of mastery of self, right? I've studied Buddhist principles and practices. I meditate twice a day. This idea that it all starts here, right? Like everything starts right here. This is where it all starts. And being able to control yourself and being able to master yourself and being able to not jump to quick judgments, being able to look at patterns, right? The idea that you can take a step back and do things in a calm way is absolutely critical for the future of success. And, I often talk about how we've failed this generation when it comes to technology. We've given them a pass. Years ago, we used to call them, we still do to some degree, we call them the digital natives, right? We say that they are born with technology. Even now we're saying, oh, this is the AI generation. And we just assume they know how to use these tools. But the truth is that they don't. And if you don't believe me, go ask a 10-year-old how Bluetooth works. They walk around with their phones and their headphones in their ears. They have no idea how that technology works, right? They have no idea how websites work. They have no idea how fiber works or Wi-Fi or anything, right? We've given this generation a pass. And I think it's time we go back to basics and we really teach them digitalization and technology skills, because it's critical, right? Especially with AI, giving them the opportunity to learn those skills are absolutely critical. So what I think we need, and this is the secret to all of this, right? The secret sauce to all of this, I think what we need isn't to go reinvent education or to change it or to fundamentally do things in a different way. I think what we need is what most corporations and businesses need. We need a shift from trying to stick things and to do things in the old traditional ways, like now we got kids writing in blue books so that they don't, quote, cheat, to finding this truth that this is what the world looks like. This is what we're facing. And what we need to do is iterate and change and innovate at a very incremental level, right? So starting literally with the organizations at the top, right? Everything from a school leader to a district leader to a state leader, how are they building the team that they need? How are they making sure they're bringing the best people on to manage that? How is that leader providing that team the autonomy that they need, the purpose that they need, the mastery that they need? And then once you build that kind of culture, that cascades down into the organization as a whole. And so what we need is this idea of iteration and innovation in education, so that we're constantly not trying to fight the system and trying to keep things the same, but rather asking ourselves every day, every week, every month, every school year, what are we doing that's wrong? Almost as easy, I know it sounds simple, but almost as easy as doing a start, stop, and continue exercise, where you're like, what are the things that we need to stop doing? What are the things that we need to start doing? What are the things that are fundamental that we need to continue doing? And doing that on a continuous basis, so that we're not just sticking to the same thing. I oftentimes talk to educators and they'll say, I've been teaching fourth grade for 20 years. And they say, I have 20 years of experience. And I often ask myself, and sometimes I ask them, if they're not going to punch me in the face, I ask them, do you have 20 years of experience, or do you have 1 year of experience 20 times? And there's a difference, right? If you're teaching fourth grade the same way you were teaching fourth grade 20 years ago, then you have 1 year of experience. So the idea is, how do we build 20 years of experience, but build 20 years of iteration and innovation experience that we're constantly shifting and doing things in new ways, experimenting. And oftentimes what stops us from doing these things are fear. Fear of parents, fear of legislatures, fear of the system, when the reality is that we don't have a choice anymore. This isn't an issue of a must have or nice to have. Again, you go, after you're done listening to this, go do a search for new college graduates and employment markets. And it'll show you that even if you're graduating from the top markets, you're not finding work, right? And recently, the CEO of Anthropic made some big news when he predicted that in the next 2 to 5 years, 50% of entry-level jobs are going to go to AI or robotics, but they're definitely not going to go to young 21-year-olds that are just entering the workforce. They're going to need to come in with a different set of skills. So we are no longer at a point where it's nice to have a new education system or nice to have a different kind of education model. We are at a critical point where we must do these things in order for our students to be able to learn and adapt given the environment that we're building, because I just showed you everything that's coming. And education, to me, should be a place where my students, my kids, go and build the critical human skills that they need. So I've said this many times, I've said this publicly, and my kids will tell you firsthand, even my 10-year-old, I've never looked at my kids' report cards, ever. As a matter of fact, my 10-year-old got her end of fourth grade assessment, and it was sent to me. I printed it and handed it to her and said, "This is for you. It's not for me," because I don't care. I don't care that she got an A in English. I don't care that she got a 79 in social studies. It means nothing to me. I want to know, is she learning how to think? Is she learning how to get things done? Is she learning how to be part of a community? Is she learning to be kind? Is she learning how to master her skills? Is she learning how to manage her stress? Does she understand the role of technology and digitalization? I could care less what the subject is. Those are the things that I care about. And I think it's time that we all care about those things for all our students. And here's the thing. What keeps me going through all this is that we've done this before. This isn't the first time we're experiencing this. Most people don't understand or realize that we've done this with other technologies in the past. This is a photo of I don't know if that's actually Thomas Edison, but that's a photo of Pearl Street, Thomas Edison's first power plant in New York in the late 1800s. And he introduced this concept of electricity. And this is hard to believe, but most people at the time were like, that electricity thing, that's a fad. That's not going to stick around. We're going to stick to our steam engines. He was only able to convince 4% of the businesses in the community to switch to electricity. And those companies that were using electricity were not getting good results. And all the other companies, all the other business leaders were saying, see, look, even if they use it, they're not getting good results. And it's because what those companies did is that they took they took electricity and they replaced their steam engine. And they were getting the same results, maybe a little more efficiency. And that's what we're seeing in education. And that was the point of my article. Because if all we do is take technology, take AI, take whatever technology, and put it on top of our current system, then we're going to get our current system results, right? It wasn't until those businesses changed their models, until they changed their practices, that they started taking advantage of electricity. And when they did that, electricity took off. I think we can safely say electricity did pretty well. And so now we're with this new technology called, whether you call it the internet, whether it's AI, whether it's machine learning, whether it's blockchain. If all we do is take these technologies and put it on top of our current system, then all we're doing is making the old system maybe a little bit more efficient. And what we need to do, instead of ask ourselves, what's the best learning model? We don't need to invent anything new. It's all out there, right? Right now, you can do a search for what's the best learning model to implement, and you'll get thousands of research papers on what the best models are. We know what good models of education are. What we can do is say, okay, cool. How do we use these modern technologies to make those learning models come to life. And that's what our focus should be. And that's where we should spend the majority of our time in education. And with that, there's my website. That's my email. Feel free to reach out. I think we have some questions here. I've got a couple minutes, so I'm going to answer some of these that I said. How can we assess skills like creativity, adaptability, resilience in schools? That is a wonderful question, because I think that's absolutely critical. And I would ask, a lot of it might come from the business side, right? So oftentimes when I talk to parent groups, I'll say, what grade did you get last year? And they're like, what grade? No, I didn't get a grade. Well, how are you assessed? Oh, look, I had a list of things to get accomplished. And then at the end of the year, I checked to see if I accomplished those things, and I got rated on whether I did or I didn't. And I was rated on whether I was creative or whether I was adaptable or whether I was inclusive. I'm like, oh, cool. So we have those metrics. And so what I'm trying to do with that human matrix that I showed you, human skills matrix, is say, okay, how do we assess learning, the ability to learn in school and in business? How do we can forget education, we can do this in business. How do you assess whether or not someone has the ability to learn? And so I'm trying to come up with ways to do those types of assessments. And so it's an absolutely critical question, but it's definitely not assessed. It's not going to be test scores. And oftentimes it might be peer assessments, how we do things in business, right? So my evaluations at Google, for example, was Jaime was very creative in this, or Jaime was very assertive with this, or Jaime saw something we didn't see. So those assessments might be more observational. Another question, how do we prepare students for jobs that don't exist yet, using tools that haven't been invented to solve problems that we don't? That's actually one of my quotes from like 20 years ago. And I said, we're preparing kids for jobs that don't exist using technology that doesn't exist. How do you do that? And I think my answer is that it's that human skills matrix. If we can focus on that, we can help them build those skills, then what can't they do, right? I would argue that you master those skills and there isn't a job that you can't take on. Now, there are jobs that require lots of training, right? You can't take those human skills and then say, oh, I'm going to be a doctor now, or I'm going to be a lawyer. I'm not saying that one thing replaces the other. I'm saying that this is in addition to building those human skills, you might need to specialize in some things. But overall, on a general contract, general business basis, you master those human skills, and I don't think there's a job you can't do. What inspired you to dedicate your career to education? So I mentioned this earlier, right? So I don't know if my career is dedicated to education. I think my career is dedicated to creating organizations, whether those are education or businesses, where people can thrive, where people can master. Look, the same three things, whether you like it or not, motivate all human beings. It's the same three things: purpose, autonomy, and mastery. And if you look at education, purpose is there. Nobody becomes a teacher to become a multimillionaire, right? Purpose is there. What's missing is autonomy. We give teachers a curriculum. We say, here, you must teach this, and we shut them out of the process, as opposed to giving teachers, as they build their skills, more autonomy to run their classrooms the way they see fit. And we need to do a better job helping them master those skills, not just with the BS performance development that we do, but more with letting them pick how they think they can get better at what they do at their profession. How do we redesign standardized testing to better reflect skills needed for the future? Well, that's a great question. We stop standardized testing. One of the great things about Google is that two quick things, and I'll end with this. And if you have any other questions, we can do them live as well. But with the 2 minutes that we have left, I'll tell you this. Google, we used to hire for, when they hired people at the beginning, they looked at what school you went to and your test scores. And they literally would rate your test scores. And then Laszlo Bach, who was the head of HR at Google during Google's prime, who's a friend of mine, they went and did a study, and they showed clearly, and these studies are available, you can find these, clearly show that test scores at university, what university you went to and your test scores at the university had nothing to do with job performance. Nothing, right? No correlation at all. So that's number one. Number two is I did not go to Stanford or Harvard or Princeton or any of the elite schools that Google recruits from. I went to SUNY Brockport in upstate New York. And one of my favorite experiences at Google was the 1,000 interviews that I did with candidates that wanted to work at Google. And so I would be on a call with a candidate. And this is a 21-year-old that is graduating from Stanford or Harvard. And my job was to determine whether they were smart. And when they asked me, like, what school did you go to? SUNY Brockport. They looked puzzled by that. And it was a great illustration that being smart and being creative and being impactful has nothing to do with the test scores you have. So in my opinion, we get rid of the standardized testings completely.
Thank you so much, Dr. Jaime, for this very inspiring talk. But please, before closing, and you said that at the beginning of the talk, we have been trying to get a hold of you for a long time. So please let us just abuse of your time for a couple more minutes.
Sure, of course.
I would like to pass the floor to Dr. Abdel Kadiri, president of the Temkin Foundation. He has a few words to say. Dr. Kadiri, please.
Thank you. Jaime, you could not possibly believe how much I'm happy to see you. And I've drunk every single thing of what you just said, as it kind of aligns with everything we do here. One of the ideas that we're kind of grappling with is how to people are afraid of AI, and we are thinking about ways of challenging AI, and that's a topic I would like to touch base on with you at any time of your choosing. Second, education business as usual is no longer possible because of what you just said. Most of what you said, though you did not address the issue per se, but most of what you said is that education, the way we're doing it here, with the way it's being done in Africa, and Africa, if I may say, is the future of what we are, what we will be in years from now, is no longer possible, no longer affordable, and no longer something we could keep on doing. We have to, and that's what we say at Temkin, we have to reinvent education. And to reinvent education, we need to be together. We need to be exposed to everything that's being done anywhere, any place, by any people, and come up with something that's going to answer some of the questions that came up for which you volunteered answered. How could we, and we said that so many times to ministers, to head of state, to some of the people we've been dealing with it, how could we possibly design educational system for kids whose parents have not met yet, whose parents are not born yet? So we have to, and you kind of answered that, saying, teach people how to be creative, teach them how to be problem solving, and right. that process has to be ingrained in what we are today. Second idea, I would like to hold a meeting with you at your convenience this week, next week, whenever, to talk about Africa. We've launched an initiative calling for Education Decade, Africa Education Decade. And I think if we could help is not probably no, initiate a dynamic within the 53 African states. We've sent letters, we've sent a request to the new head of the African Commission, and we're going by meeting executives and government representative, head of state, etc., calling on that. We would be really achieving a lot. So that's the second. And again, thank you so much from the very bottom of my dear friend.
I just want to respond real quick because I think you say something that's important that I did not bring up, which is for a couple of years, I left Google in 2020. For a couple of years, I stopped traveling because I was traveling 300,000 miles a year. I actually just last week sent messages to all the speaker bureaus that I participate with and work, say I'm available again. And here's why I bring this up. Well, one, I'm available to go and speak at events and conferences and leaders. That's what I do. And so I'm available to do that. And oftentimes you think like, okay, you go and speak at an event and you say something and you say the same thing that you might have said in another event. What's the impact? my experience is that this is how change happens, right? It's paradigm shifting. I can't tell you the number of times that there's a university, I can't think of the university off the top of my head, that literally changed its program to basically say, what problem do you want to solve? And then let's figure out a program for you to solve that problem. Like, they literally changed the curriculum. Just some participant that came to a conference that I spoke at, or someone will mention a school that they started because of something that they heard. I don't think we really give credit to the idea of paradigm shifting, where you hear something, a sentence, a thought, a word, something that just literally changes the way you see the world. And it's so powerful and impactful. And I recognize that now. And I haven't spent a time in all of Africa. I've been able to spend a month and a half in Kenya and Tanzania and Rwanda 20 years ago. I had a wonderful time there exploring. And you're right. I think the future is Africa. I think that if you're learning anything about America today, is that you're kind of on your own. And instead of thinking about AI and technology as a dangerous thing, we can look at it as a potential for countries and systems to be able to build their own thing without having to rely on some of the superpowers. And so with those two things in mind, if there's opportunities for me to come out and visit and speak at events or come to some of these meetings, I have experience working with education ministers. It's surprising how one talk or one conversation can be paradigm shifting. But that's what changes, right? That's how change happens, right? It's the old saying, never forget what a small group of dedicated people can do to change the world, because it's the only thing that ever has.
Absolutely. Thanks a lot, Aya. Thank you. I'll be reaching out, Jaime. I'll be reaching out to have a session with you. Okay.
Thank you very much. I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
you, my
you
friend.
so much. We appreciate your time as well. And please let me say that you really have cute kids, and I wish them the brightest of the futures, especially Azella. And also that since you brought storytelling, you're an amazing storyteller. And we hope we get to hear more stories of you in upcoming occasions. Thank you so much for your time, and looking forward to another opportunity with you. Thank you so much, Dr. Jaime.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.